We're here to discuss the beginning of the Torah. We're in a time of the year that deals with beginnings. We had Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, holiday of Sukkot, Simchas Torah, and this week we're going to be reading Bereshit, the beginning of the Torah, Genesis. And I'd like to dedicate this class to the soldiers and the entire Jewish population of the Holy Land, of Eretz Yisrael, the land of Israel, who are now in a very difficult period, defending themselves against ruthless murderers who want to annihilate them. And one of the ways that we bring protection to our brethren is through the study of Torah, and that's what we're going to be engaging in now. And I'd like to welcome and introduce my esteemed son-in-law, Rabbi Sholom Feldman, came all the way from Florida to join us here in Buffalo. We start reading the Torah anew. We started already on Simchas Torah, but we read the entire section of Bereshit on this coming Shabbat. And there's a famous saying of the third Chabad Rebbe, known as the Tzemach Tzedek, that the way we situate ourselves, we establish ourselves on this Shabbos, that's how the whole year will follow. So what does that mean? Why is it such an important Shabbos? I'd like to share some thoughts that you might have.
We know that with creation, and that's what the whole Bereshit starts talking about, and we start reading that this week, is the creation, is the whole idea of renewal. We know every single year, according to Kabbalah, and as the Alter Rebbe explains in Chassidus, that every single year the world is recreated again. A new energy comes down to the world in Rosh Hashanah. So the whole process of creation happens again every single year. So when we start reading about Bereshit, after we do the spiritual service that we had over Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, and Simchas Torah, and now we're starting the year again, we need to take from the message of the creation the first time around and implement that again now, because those energies are happening again. So it's extremely important for us, the way we start off, that is the way we implement the new energies of creation is the way the whole year will go.
Yeah, I remember learning one of the Rebbe's talks where he explains that creation, you mentioned about every year it's created, but in truth, it's recreated every instant. God continuously creates the world. And the way he creates the world, God used an instrument. The instrument is the Torah. Well, if that's true, that every second, every instant, the world is recreated with Torah, that means that the existence of the world cannot possibly be in a clash with Torah. And that's a very powerful lesson, because most of our challenges in implementing the teachings of the Torah is that we feel, well, we have to deal with reality. Reality says that I have to be open, my business has to be open on Shabbat. Otherwise, I'm not going to make a living. The Torah says your business should be closed on Shabbat. There's a conflict. But the conflict is not a real conflict, because reality is determined by God creating the world through the Torah. And if we bear that in mind, I think it's an incredible boost to our dedication to the teachings of Torah, that we know that there's not going to be a conflict. And if we think there is a conflict, it's just in our imagination. And reality tells us there is no conflict. Now, obviously, there are times when the Torah itself says that there is a conflict. Let's say someone's life is in danger, and we have to break the Shabbat to save the life. We don't say, well, Torah says you're not supposed to break the Shabbat, and so therefore I don't have to worry about a person's life. The Torah there acknowledges that when there is that situation, that you're obligated to break the Shabbat, to violate the laws. It's not a violation to save the life. But otherwise, reality is determined by the Torah. And when we situate ourselves on this Shabbat, this week, with that belief intact, it will strengthen us and energize us to withstand all the pressures that we're going to endure the rest of the year.
I think it's very interesting about that you're saying there's no conflict, obviously, between Torah and creation, that many people seem to think that there's a conflict between science and Torah, the way we see things and the way the Torah says things are. But in fact, what's fascinating about even science over the last few years is the more that science is finding the incredible intricacies of creation, and the more they understand that this is impossible, it could not have been an accident. So actually the study of science is in fact the study of creation. And so it's impossible for there to be a conflict. And science is coming to that realization more and more now of that reality that there has to be a God that created this. There was an intelligent design to the world. And therefore, it's impossible to say that anything in the world could be in conflict with the Creator.
Right. There's another very important point that the Rebbe would emphasize. We have a lot of respect for science. Judaism has a lot of respect for science because science is the pursuit of truth.
And perhaps even science is the study of God, the
Right.
way it is in this world.
But it's only the pursuit of truth. Science never arrogated to itself the position that whatever we say is fact, because theories come and theories go. Torah is divine wisdom, which by definition means truth. So if there's a conflict between science and Torah, it's a conflict between the present understanding of things in science with the reality of Torah. So the first premise has to be that Torah is right. Science is not yet, doesn't yet have the whole picture. Now there are times when our understanding of Torah may be faulty, so we have to understand what the Torah is saying. But when we do understand what the Torah is saying, it cannot conflict with science. Just to give an example of a conflict that everyone talks about is the age of the world, the age of the universe. According to science, it's many billions of years. According to the Torah, it's close to 6,000 years. How do you reconcile those two beliefs? And the answer is there's no need to reconcile them because nobody says that when God created the world, he was limited to start the world off at point zero and then go from there, and then it has to evolve for billions of years. When God created the world, he created the world a completed world, a 13 billion year old universe. However, scientific theories state.
The interesting thing about the scientific theories is that there is conflicting theories within
Right,
science,
right.
that it can't be more than this many years, and another theory says it can't be less than that many years. So
Right, but even if they all agree it must be at least so many billion years old, God created an old world. I remember saying this once, and a scientist was upset at me, and he said, well, then you're saying that God is deceiving us. He created an ancient world. To us, it looks like it's a new world. It is a new world, but it seems to be an ancient world, rather. And my answer to this scientist was, do you know what the word for in Hebrew is for world? No, he didn't know. I said, it's olam. What is the root of that word? The word olam means concealment. That God created a world in which he deliberately concealed his presence, not to fool us, but to give us a challenge that we introduce God into this world and reveal his presence here. So in fact, that's exactly the point. And if you think about it, the logical question that should not be, how could creation have taken place in 6 days? Why did God need 6 days? In the first instant, he could have created a fully developed world. So of course, there were explanations why he created it in 6 days, but there's no difficulty for God to have created everything billions of years old. If somehow someone would go back in a time machine to the first instant of creation, and they would then use all their scientific instruments, they would determine that the world was many billions of years old, the very first instant. So, see, that's an apparent conflict, but it's not a real conflict, because God could have created a completed world. In fact, when Adam was created, he was created an adult. God didn't have to make him go through all the stages of infancy and toddler and teenage. God wouldn't want to deal with a teenager, of course, but maybe that's the reason. But God created, he was 20 years old, a fully mature adult, Adam and Eve. So there's really no conflict.
Well, perhaps one of the reasons why God would have created the world in a way that appeared to be billions of years old was to give us the ability, in fact, for science to actually study the world and how it actually is made up.
That's a good insight.
So if God did not make the world billions of years old, there's no way we would understand whether it's geology or whether it's anything to do with the way the world operates, the way the elements operate. So the study of that is, in fact, the study of God's creation. And this way we understand the world more and better through science. If God wouldn't have made it billions of years old, there's no way that we would be able to have the study of science altogether.
Right. I'm treading on very thin ice over here, but many people will say, what about evolution? How did we come about if not evolution? So my response to that is, you could believe in evolution if you want, but you have to believe that God made evolution happen. Because mathematically, even scientists admit it's really very challenging to figure out how things could have evolved. The human eye is so intricate in so short a time span. So if you believe in evolution, fine, but you have to believe that God made evolution happen. But then, if you believe that God made evolution happen, God didn't need to have evolution. He could have created a world that looks like one species evolved from another, but it happened without the process of evolution. So you want to believe in evolution, fine, but you have to recognize that evolution must have had a God making it happen and causing it to happen.
And if you believe in evolution without believing in a God, then that itself is a religion.
Right.
So it's also a faith. It's not, there's no answer to how it could have come about other than to say evolution. Evolution is another form of God, except trying to take away the spiritual aspect of it.
Right. One of the reasons why evolution is accepted, because there's no other scientific theory to explain how things developed, unless you acknowledge that there's a God. Well, if there's a God, then the scientist says, "Oh, you don't need me." But the truth is, as you just said before, that we respect science. We want scientists to probe the universe, to find its secrets. But they should always recognize that it's God who put it all there and made it happen.
I knew a professor in Australia named Professor Sofer. He was a professor of statistics.
Right, I knew him very well.
Of mathematics. In Sydney University, I believe, and he actually worked for a number of years for a government project on trying to explain evolution in a statistical sense as well. So his job was actually to try and explain evolution and to try and put the scientific side of that to explain it in a statistical sense. And he said that that's how he started. He was not a believer at all when he first started that job, and he was very happy to try and be part of a group that's going to prove evolution.
Right.
And he said within 3 years on the job, he said the more he looked into it, the more he saw how it was actually statistically impossible for there to have been an evolution according to statistics, the way it's happened and the way evolution describes it. He says that the chances are more than 1 in trillions of whatever it might be.
Unless God is the one who made it happen.
Unless
right.
there was an intelligent design, it's impossible this could have happened by accident. And he actually wrote a paper on this, writing how it's statistically impossible for evolution to have happened in the way that it happened. And that's what actually turned him into a believer, was this study that he did for a few years. And he said he published that paper, and I have that paper as well, and he said that not one scientist or any other journal or anything ever was able to give an answer to his statistical paper that he gave on the odds of evolution. So the chances are that evolution is just a statistically impossibility. And he used to go around talking about that as well, and then talking about how we can, how creation and science actually goes together, and the more one studies it, the more one can see it. But that was his. That was
right.
one of his.
He was
papers.
actually in Buffalo, probably over 40 years ago, and that was his topic: the reconciling Torah with science. On another note, we know that Torah, the word Torah, means instruction. It's there to teach us how to live our lives. But then you read the book of Genesis, it's very little about telling us what to do. It's the story of creation, the story of Adam and Eve, of Cain and Abel, of Noah, the patriarchs, the matriarchs, the Egyptian bondage, Joseph and his brothers. Virtually all of Genesis is history, stories. How do we understand that?
Clearly, every single one of the stories that's there is not there to teach us history. Everything that's written there is true and is historical, and that's what we believe. But there would have been a lot more events that happened in the first few thousand years of creation than what was recorded in Genesis. So obviously, the stories that were brought there was only in order to teach us how to lead our lives. And each particular detail of each story is there to teach us how to live our lives. Therefore, when we talk about the whole concept of creation, the fact that we even know that there was a creator, and that as we mentioned before, the world is being constantly recreated, and that there is a God that created us, it means that every single one of us are here for a purpose, for a reason, for a meaning, and we need to take that within our own lives to understand that we're all here for a purpose.
Right, but the question is, what is the reason why we have to have such a detailed discussion of all of history from creation onward until the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai? Rashi seems to be addressing that question.
So in the first Rashi, where he says if the Torah is just about mitzvahs, we should start off straight away with the giving of the Torah instead of talking about the creation and everything associated with that. But in the first Rashi, as we would have studied today, being the beginning of the Torah, Rashi makes it very clear that Hashem wanted the world to know that he created the world, and primarily he created the world in order for us to keep Torah in the world, and in order for the Jewish people to be able to perform his mission and the destiny for the Jews in the world to be able to create God's dwelling place in this world. And therefore, God didn't just want to do it in a general sense, but he wanted to be specific. So there was the people, the Jewish people, and he gave us also the Jewish land, which is the land of Israel. And Rashi actually says that it's not a message that Hashem was giving just to the Jewish people, but Hashem putting in the beginning of the Torah, the creation, is to say, I created the world, and if I created the world, therefore I'm able to give the land of Israel to whoever I want to give the land of Israel to, and therefore if anyone comes with any complaints that the Jewish people have stolen the land from its inhabitants...
Whoever says that?
there are those that try to say that on occasion. And obviously our thoughts are with our brothers and sisters in Israel at the moment. But when they try and say that, Rashi says that this is the reason why Hashem starts the Torah with creation, is to say that I created it, I gave it to the nations before Israel came about, and then I decided that land will be the land, the base of which, the Holy Land, of which the Jews will be able to base themselves to be the light to the whole world. And that's our mission, is obviously to be the light to the world. And if anyone tries to say that we've stolen it, it's very easy to say. God created the world. God's in charge. He gave us that land. And it's interesting that billions of people, including all of Islam, besides of, and it's quite clear in the Quran, it's just as much as is in the Old Testament and the New Testament, that it is very clear in the Bible, which billions of people today believe in, that God created the world and he gave the land of Israel to the Jewish people, and this is one of the main reasons why we start the Torah, the greatest book ever, which God gave us, is for this particular purpose, that our mission is one that is based in the land of Israel.
But it's interesting that Rashi, who lived in the 11th century, raises that issue about Jews are accused of stealing the land. There were hardly any Jews living in Israel at that time. That was right at the time of the Crusades, when Christianity and Islam were both fighting over the land. And here Rashi says you should know it's neither yours or yours. It was given to the Jewish people.
Well, unfortunately, the people in Israel were always the sandwich in the middle. You know, there was always a Jewish presence in Israel, even through the Middle Ages.
Right, but a very small Jewish presence at that time.
Whether it was, a couple 100,000 or whatever it might have been, or even in the tens of thousands, exactly how many there were, but they were always, when the Christians came and the Muslims came to try and fight over, the reality is that was Rashi was saying, you can try and fight over it, but ultimately it's not yours, it belongs to the Jewish people. And this is what, there's a lot of things in the Torah that seem to be specifically made and created for our time today. And this seems to be one of them. Israel is only in an independent state of the Jewish people now, only 75 years. But now is the time that clearly, ever since then, that the world has been saying that Israel has stolen the land. And it's definitely for our times that if all we need to do, and the world does respect that. The world believes in the Bible. The world believes in God. All we need to say and be strong about that and not to be apologetic about it. It's our land. God gave it to us. And if we say we're not going anywhere, the Jewish people belong in Israel, and Israel belongs to the Jewish people. The rest of the world, generally speaking, respects that and understands that. And in fact, here in America, there's millions and millions and millions of Christian believers that are very strong supporters of Israel for that exact reason, because they believe that Israel is the God-given land of the Jewish people. Another interesting, talking about You mentioned keeping Shabbat before. I believe that when God gave the present of Shabbat to the Jewish people, it's one of the 10 Commandments, is to keep the seventh day holy. I believe he wasn't so much referring to the last couple thousand years. I think he was referring to our times today. I think more than ever before that people are connected to their smartphones, connected to the internet, connected to, in a way that it's 24/7, there's non-stop. There's no stop for people to actually put all that aside and be able to sit down and just think about God and family and their spiritual development for a day. And God knew that in 2,000 years' time, there's going to come a time that people are going to be connected 24/7. They need one day to be able to just stop and focus. And we see, and that is part of what we see, this progression to the Messianic era, to the end of days, that we are coming to now, where obviously God's presence will be revealed on the world. That this is part of that revelation that's happening now in the world, is that a lot of what was instructed a couple thousand years ago in the Torah is now, all those prophecies are now coming revealed today.
Right. It's interesting that there are two themes to Shabbat. One is that it's a remembrance of creation. That makes sense. God rested on that day from creation. But it's also a remembrance of the Exodus from Egypt. What does the Shabbat have to do with the Exodus? But if you really think about it, I think the biggest problem of society today is addiction. We're all slaves to whatever addiction is. It could be drugs, it could be alcohol, it could be our cell phones, our smartphones. We're literally addicted to technology, and it destroys lives.
Yeah, families sitting around a table communicating by text.
Right. As someone told me, they were working and they're just 5 feet away from their employer. And he said, "How come you didn't text me?" We are slaves, but Shabbat liberates us from that. It's literally the most liberating day of the week, that you don't even feel a need to go to your cell phone. If I'm walking outside during the week and I don't have my cell phone, I feel something is missing. But on Shabbat, you don't feel it. I remember in the days when people used to smoke.
That's right.
They would smoke, chain smokers, 6 days a week.
They couldn't go a few minutes without it.
Right, Shabbat they were free. They were liberated. The second Shabbat was over, they would rush to their cigarettes. There's something about Shabbat that liberates us, and this can be understood on many different levels, on a very simple level, as we just discussed, but also on higher levels. There's always limitations to us spiritually, and Shabbat is the day when we're liberated. It's very much an exodus from Egypt, from bondage. And one of the things that the Talmud tells us, that if the Jewish people would only observe the Sabbath, one version says 2 Sabbaths, this other version says each Sabbath has 2 parts to it, we would bring redemption. Because Shabbat is redemption. The way we observe Shabbos, we're redeeming ourselves and liberating ourselves, and that will lead to the ultimate redemption, as you just mentioned.
And that's going back to the beginning of creation. Is God created the world in 6 days, and the seventh day he rested, was precisely in order to show that this is the ultimate purpose of creation. Right. Is for us to be redeemed from the bondage, so to speak, of the 6 days of the week.
Right. Now, getting back to Israel, that Israel is the land that God gave us. It's interesting, it's fascinating that historically everyone wanted Israel. No one was able to colonize it. The Crusades were fighting, the Muslims and the Christians, who should occupy, who should control Israel, but they never turned it into anything. There was never any real government there. Maimonides visited Israel, and he had to leave. He says this place is overrun by bandits. It's a criminal existence.
Mark Twain, when he went to Israel, he wrote about his travels there, and says how the place is just completely desolate. There's
right.
Nothing there.
Why is it desolate? Everyone wants it. Everyone wants it, but no one was able to do it. So there's a midrash that says that God, and that our relationship to Israel is like a garment tailor-made for a person. If someone goes to a tailor and says, "I want you to make me a garment that should fit me exactly," no one else could put it on. Even if you're the same size, there's something that's going to be too much fabric here, too little over there. It's tailor-made for the Jewish people, and it cannot be colonized by anyone else.
It's an interesting thing that all of the curses that is written in Deuteronomy, it makes it clear that that one of the curses is that your enemies will completely destroy the country, Israel referring to, and you'll be dispersed throughout the nations. And it says, and your enemies will not settle it. So in other words, the land will remain desolate. So Rashi actually comments there, and it says that, the land's going to remain desolate. That's not a curse. It's actually a blessing for the Jewish people to know that over thousands of years, people will try to dwell, people will try to go there, and they'll try to build it up, but no one will be able to, because the Jewish people will return and will rebuild. And we're seeing the results of those prophecies today. And with all of those that are trying to remove the Jews again from the land, God forbid, they may have had a small tragic success in recent days, but there's no question that the Jewish people belong in Israel. God will protect the Jewish people in Israel because it is a land that belongs to the Jewish people, and that is where the Jewish people will flourish and will succeed.
I always like to talk about Israel as the three H's. It's the Holy Land, the homeland, and the hope land. Throughout history, the Jews never lost hope of getting back to Israel when it seemed impossible. The Jews were scattered all over the world. Israel was controlled by other forces, and yet Jews never lost the hope. In Hebrew, the word for hope is tikva. The root of that word is kav, a line. We always had a line connecting us to Israel. But not only was it the hope land, but it's the homeland of the Jewish people. This is our home. Every nation has their home. This is our home. And no matter how many years it is that we were alienated from the land, it was never thought of as not being anything else but our home. But it's so important that we don't just leave the hope land and homeland, that we have to make sure that we emphasize that it's the Holy Land. Because if we lose the understanding that Israel is a holy land, it's the land in which God's presence is more revealed than any other place in the world. As it says in the Bible, it's the land that God watches over from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, which means perpetually. If we lose that, then we lose our ability to maintain it. And that's why we had access to the land of Israel during the first temple era, then the second temple, and when we lost it, because we lost the idea of Israel being the Holy Land. And that's why it's so important. I know there are many Jews in Israel that call themselves secular. I emphasize the word they call themselves. They're not really secular. The Rabbi would always say that no Jew is secular. It's an oxymoron. A secular Jew, the definition of a Jew is someone who has a special connection with God. But when people forget about that holiness, they lose their access to the land, and we suffer, we become vulnerable. So this is a time, especially now, when we have to focus on the Holy Land idea, not just the Hope Land and the Homeland.
It's the national anthem of Israel is Hatikva, is the hope. Right. They're calling all about the hope, but the Rebbe would always say the hope without the holy part, it's lacking its foundation. So the hope is there as long as the hope is there for it to be the Holy Land. And that's what we need to encourage as many Jews in Israel and around the world, to recognize that our connection to Israel is not just a historical cultural one.
Sometimes it takes a crisis for Jews to recognize, even the so-called secular Jews. I'm sure now, I didn't hear any reports, but I know from past history, the Yom Kippur War, the Six-Day War, hundreds of thousands of Jews in Israel who never put on tefillin would start putting on tefillin. Women would light Shabbos candles, and in general, they became much more aware of their relationship with Israel through the Holy Land concept, that they realized we're Jews, we have to be holy. And sometimes when we lose that, we open ourselves up to attacks from other religions and saying, you don't deserve Israel, you don't respect its integrity. You have to. When you live in a home, you can live in a pigsty if you want, but other people will say, look, I'll take over your home and clean it up. We have to keep the land clean and pure and holy for us to really have the right to demand that this is our land. And it is happening. Israel's becoming more, in spite of all the news reports, Israel's becoming more and more spiritual, more godly, and more closer to the teachings of the Torah.
And that's, as we mentioned, is the only right that the Jewish people have to the land is only because God gave it to us in order for us to fulfill our mission there. And obviously the Jewish people have to recognize their responsibility of teaching the world, of being a moral light to the world, which is also one of the reasons why Israel, by the world, interestingly enough, people call it hypocrisy of the nations, and it is hypocrisy that they hold Israel to a different standard than they would hold any other nation in the world. And they keep on calling out Israel's misdeeds, so to speak. They're happy to stand up and support murderers against Israel when Israel doesn't stand up to the highest moral standing that they believe Israel should be. And there is a subconscious thing amongst the nations of the world that Israel is held to a higher standard and should be held to a higher standard, because God said that Israel has to be the light of the nations, and the nations expect Israel to be the moral lamp to not only the Middle East but to the whole world.
Right. To change the subject to the next theme of the parsha of this section of the Torah, Adam and Eve, humanity is introduced into the world, and they mess up. They're given one commandment. Actually, they were given 6 commandments, but there was one special commandment they were given. You could eat any fruit of any tree, but there's one tree you can't eat from that tree, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And they blow it. How does that make any sense? You know, Adam and Eve were the only human beings that were fashioned directly by God. They were not born through parents biologically. God fashioned them. They must have been at a very high spiritual level. In fact, in the teachings of Kabbalah, we're told that Adam had the highest soul, even higher than Moses, and yet he blew it. He and Eve, how could that be?
I'm sure you'll have a couple of better answers than what I could have, but I once heard something very interesting in the name of Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch, that he said that the tree of knowledge of good and evil, good and evil is as we see today, unfortunately, people are finding it difficult to identify what is good and what is evil. Even within the war that's going on in Israel, there are people, good people, that seem to be identifying with murderers and terrorists in a way that they think is good. And it's shocking, actually, the whole idea of what is good and what is evil, the divide in America today between what's good and what's evil, and both sides are claiming the good is on their side and evil is on the other side. And it's absolutely fascinating to see all of this. So good and evil is a very subjective type of thing. So this knowledge of good and evil, this tree of knowledge of good and evil, is that prior to Adam eating from the tree of good and evil, there was only one system of what's good and what's evil, and that is God decides what's good, God decides what's evil, He created the world, He'll say what's good and evil, and everyone saw good and evil in the same way that God did. But what happened is that taking of the fruit of, so to speak, is symbolic of that Adam decided that, one second, I'm so great, as you mentioned before, I was created by God Himself. I can decide what's good and what's evil. And taking from the tree of good and evil, all of a sudden that actually brought evil into the world. How did that do that? It mixed in the man's consciousness that they can decide what's good and what's evil. And so therefore you have the confusion of what's going on today, and throughout history, of this confusion of what's good and what's evil. And this goes back to us having a look at the Torah and saying, let's go back to our morals, let's go back to the godly directions. What is good and what is evil? And if God says that it's good, then that's what's good is. You don't murder, you don't do certain things, you don't steal, you don't kill, there's certain things that you don't do. They are the objective good and evil, except for, obviously, in times when you have to. If you need to defend yourself, obviously you're allowed to do whatever you need to do in order to defend your life. So that, again, is a value in the Torah that says when you're allowed to do certain things. You're allowed to defend yourself by killing others in order to defend your own life. But again, that is a very objective point of good and evil, which we have to go back to the Torah to see our values, because as soon as we start taking those values on ourselves, all of a sudden you get the tree of good and evil getting mixed up, that we start thinking that we can decide that. And I'm sure many of the Germans in the 1940s thought that they were doing very good things by cleaning the world of the evil of...
Some of them, even as they were going to the gallows when they were executed, still believed that they were doing... Eichmann still believed that what he did was right and good.
And you have, even today, you have all the videos which unfortunately we see, people calling out Allahu Akbar, God is great, on doing the most heinous, evil acts that you can possibly imagine, and they're doing it in the name of what they believe is good. So this idea of going back to the values, the true values of the godly values, to stop taking good and evil into our own hands, and actually starting look and seeing what does God really see as good and evil. And that should be our guiding light, and that's what the Torah comes to teach us.
The Rebbe explains the fact that Adam and Eve could have sunk so low to go against the one commandment they had, and the Rebbe points out, quoting the Midrash, that this commandment was only in effect for a few hours. If they had waited for the Shabbat, they would have been able to eat from it. Well, which normal human being is told that they can do everything they want? There's just one little restriction for 3 hours, and they can't maintain the resistance to it. So the Rebbe explains, precisely because it was the most important commandment that was ever given to humanity, because it brought death to the world. So for thousands of years, people are dying simply because of that sin. The pressure to do it was equally great. The more important a mitzvah is, a divine commandment is for a person, the more pressure they'll experience, the more resistance. Because ultimately God wants us to change the world through being challenged. So they had the greatest challenge that no one before them obviously didn't have, because no one else was there before them, but no one after them ever had. And they were like almost forced into doing it. It's like God put so much pressure on them to do it, which tells you that God really wanted them to violate the law. On one hand, he told them don't do it, but he wanted the world to not be a perfect world without effort, without being challenged. He wanted evil to come into this world so that we get rid of that evil. This is our challenge, this is our mission. And they were the ones who tragically get the bad rap for it. They're blamed for it, but it's actually God who made it happen. This is based on the Midrash, that this was God's contest.
Part of the process of creation was to create a world where there is these challenges, where there is evil, and that we can have that spiritual growth in order to overcome that on our own, not because God gave us the strength to do that, but because we ourselves have developed into a consciousness of goodness, of understanding that. And if we have a look throughout history, again, in the last, we see atrocities happening in the world. Of course we see atrocities happening in the world, but there's no time that atrocities are condemned as much as today than ever before in history. In history, throughout the ages, so many, that was normal. The atrocities that would happen was normal. But the consciousness that's actually entering humanity at large today, we're living in the best of times. It's definitely the scariest of times, because in the hands of a few people, such destruction can happen. But so that's, from that side, it's scary. But on the other side, it's only in the hands of a few people. Most of the world today has reached a level of consciousness of where they do understand what good and bad is, and bad, generally speaking, is condemned. And that's happening as part of this process of the fulfillment of all the prophecies, that humanity is coming to that recognition on their own. And that's what God wanted from Adam. And he knew that he needed Adam not to keep the laws because I told him to and I gave him the strength to do, but because he himself has come to that point. And that's why he failed in that first mission, because God didn't create him with the strength to even overcome that first challenge. Because God wanted us to be in this level that through thousands of years we should come as humanity ourselves to reach that level of consciousness.
Right. We have the power to change the world. And part of that is because when God created the world, he created the world as a good world, a Garden of Eden. The world was a garden. The world was a beautiful place, beautiful not just physically but spiritually. The sin is not original sin. That's where Judaism takes issue with that concept of original sin. No, it's not original sin. The original state of the world was pure and holy and positive and luscious, and a Garden of Eden. The sin of the tree of knowledge took the world's purity and superimposed some evil on it. So with thousands of years of our efforts, with every mitzvah that we do, we remove that superficial veneer and we reveal the inner holiness and godliness of the world. And that's why the world is, in many ways, as you just said, a much better world, in spite of the fact that there are individuals who can wreak havoc on the world. But the world has changed dramatically. It didn't evolve. We got rid of some of the evil. We separated the admixture of good and evil. That's one of the things that happened at the sin of the tree of knowledge, that good and evil became mixed. And every time we do something positive, we cause the good and evil to be separated. So on one hand, the evil becomes stronger, it's more potent, because it's not balanced and tempered by the good, but the good becomes stronger as well. And now we're at a point where we're as close to the Messianic Age as possible, that good is universally respected and embraced, and evil is condemned, but evil has become very potent. The 20th century was the worst century in history, with the Holocaust and the communist takeover of Soviet Union and China and so on. And 21st century, we're seeing this terrorism rear its ugly head, but it's on its last legs. That's the good news, that there's all the suffering that's going on today, and we hope that it should be over quickly. They should know, these evil people, that they are on borrowed time. Their end is coming very soon, and good will triumph and prevail.
We will win. So the simple reason that that's how God created the world. If we believe in a creator, then, and we believe that he created the world with a purpose and intent, then clearly that purpose will be achieved. So we know that we will win in the end, but we still have to do our bit towards that. And good will prevail. Naturally, good will prevail, and it is prevailing, as we mentioned. There was a story that Bibi Netanyahu told at the United Nations, that he was once by the Rebbe, and the Rebbe told him that your role, and he was an ambassador to the United Nations before he became Prime Minister. So the Rebbe told him when he was ambassador to the United Nations that your role in the United Nations is to just light a candle, because a little bit of light will be able to dispel all the lies and darkness that there is in the United Nations, all of that hatred towards Israel, all of that, the darkness that there is towards what is really good, and the support of evil that there was and still is to a degree at the United Nations. The Rebbe said that all you need to do is get up there and just say the truth. And if you say the truth, a little bit of light will dispel automatically a lot of darkness. And this is what's happening with us and the world in general, is that slowly we're lighting candle after candle, and that is dispelling the darkness, and we will win.
One final topic, Cain and Abel. Uncle Cain and Uncle Abel. We're descendants of the third sons, Shes, Seth. What happened over there? Why this sibling rivalry, which seems to be the last thing that will become corrected. Maimonides, when he talks about the Messianic Age, the last paragraph of his encyclopedic work, where he discusses the future, the very last paragraph, he says there will be no more jealousy and rivalry. It seems that we have to wait to the end of time for that to be corrected. So what was going on over there? Cain killing Abel. Why did Cain kill Abel?
It's a fascinating thing that we see from talking about all the stories in Genesis. A fascinating thing that we see from the first siblings, from Cain and Abel, and all siblings mentioned since then, whether it's Isaac and Ishmael, which unfortunately we see it's going for a few thousand years, although now with the Abraham Accords, that's slowly dissipating as well. You have the fight between Jacob and his brother, which again, with anti-Semitism throughout thousands of years, that continued. And then you have Joseph and his brothers, which unfortunately throughout the Jewish people, that has always constantly been these different tribes and different factions that cause strife amongst the Jewish people. It's interesting, out of all the siblings, all of those, each one of them has within it a message for us today on how we should be approaching the idea of discord amongst brothers, because ultimately not only all the Jews are brothers, all of humanity, we're all brothers. We're all created in the image of God, and we need to look at these stories and figure out ways of how we can combat the idea of this discord between the brothers. And it's interesting that you look at the first pair of siblings mentioned in the Torah that didn't have this rivalry between them.
Right.
You have Moses and Aaron.
Right.
For the first brothers that didn't have this.
And he had a good reason.
And they
to
had
be
good
jealous.
reasons too. And Aaron was the older brother, yet Moses was the leader. And Moses was jealous, potentially could have been jealous of Aaron being the high priest. And even though he was the leader, and he could have kept that for himself, so there is good reasons why there should have been sibling rivalry between them, but they didn't have that. And you have a look and you see, why didn't they have that? And why are they the first brothers that it wasn't mentioned? And clearly we need to see that Moses was the one that brought the Torah down to the world. Torah actually brings peace in the world. And when people actually respect, as we mentioned before, a higher value, higher than individual ego, and we can accept the fact that God is the creator of the world, and we're all his children, and we're all part of his existence, then a lot of that reason for the rivalries between us dissipates. And we can understand that there's a higher good, the respect for life, the respect for the other property, the respect for another person. And this is what Moses and Aaron really embodied, was this respect of this higher good, and brought down the Torah to the Jewish people and ultimately to the whole world. And this is what we need to
So
look
essentially
at.
it's the ego that creates this type of sibling rivalry and hatred. And Moses represents the ultimate in humility. Moses is called the most humble person that ever lived.
Even though he was the greatest of prophets.
And he knew it, and he knew it.
He knew it,
Right.
Yet the humility was there.
That humility allowed, so when in the Messianic Age, when Mashiach comes, it says when Mashiach comes, he'll announce to the world, the time of your redemption has arrived. But he prefaces that with humble ones. Why does he say humble ones? Righteous ones, whatever other praises. But the thing that characterizes the Messianic Age is that we'll all be so imbued with the presence of God that we will be humble. That will humble us, and we'll get along with everyone else. We won't feel threatened by another person, by a brother.
That there will be this recognition of godliness in the world. We will recognize and realize that God is constantly creating the world, that we are all dependent on his energy, on his existence, on his creation. And when we recognize that higher existence, which is why it says in the ultimate, after the coming of Mashiach, that all of us, kulam yedu osi, everyone will know God, we'll all be prophets, we'll all have this direct communication and recognition with God and of God. And being a prophet actually doesn't give you the idea of haughtiness and ego, but it does exactly the opposite. On the contrary, it creates humility, understanding that we're all really part of one, and what another person has actually adds to your life as well, and we're all we all have a reason, we all have a purpose.
And that's why there'll be universal peace, not just Jews with each other, which is a great accomplishment, that we all get along with one another. And this is a time especially when we should focus on that, the time of crisis. But the whole world, there'll be peace. The swords will be turned into plowshares and so on and so forth, because God's presence will be manifest.
And that consciousness is coming to the world, and more and more.
Oh,
we
yeah,
see
for
that.
sure, for sure. There's no question.
We see that turning that way.
All the events that are happening in the world, the bad ones, but especially the good ones, are harbingers of the ultimate redemption. But going back to Cain and Abel, the Torah gives us simple reason that Cain brought an offering to God, and God didn't accept it, and Abel brought an offering, and Abel's offering was accepted. So he was jealous, so he killed him. I mean, I once read an explanation given by a medieval Jewish philosopher that what was Cain's rationale for killing his brother? Okay, he's jealous of his brother. Why kill him? What was the difference between Cain and Abel in terms of their offerings? Cain brought vegetation. Abel brought sheep, an animal. Cain did not believe that you're not allowed to kill an animal. In his mind, animals were equal to humans. There are people today who believe that. And therefore, if you can't kill a human, you shouldn't be able to kill an animal. That was his philosophy. That's why he wouldn't bring an offering from an animal. He brought an offering from vegetation. Well, when God accepted Abel's offering, which was from an animal and not his, he said, oh, that means that humans and animals, he still thought, are the same, but if I can kill an animal, then I can kill a person as well. And that's the lesson over there, is that we're living in a time, and this is controversial, of course, where people are becoming more, this is one of the negatives of our time. It can have a positive side to it as well, that people are looking at animals the way we look at people. There are people who have children and they have pets, and they have more love for their pets than they have for their children. I remember teaching a class at UB, University of Buffalo. This goes back 25 years. And I asked the question to the students. I'm teaching Jewish ethics. God forbid, a child is drowning, not your child, and your pet is drowning. You can only save one. Which one would you save? And then I waited a few seconds. I said, if you're still thinking, you're amoral. But you know what? I'm sure there were students who thought to me, I don't know what's wrong. I would save my pet. I grew up with my pet. I love my pet. That's a strange child. It's not my child. But that's a sign that people have reduced a human being to the level of an animal. It's not elevating the animal to the level of human being. What happens, maybe not initially, but what happens is that the human being is reduced to the level of the animal.
Obviously, firstly, we just have to make a distinction clearly that even one of the commandments given to Noah was not to be cruel to animals.
Oh, sure.
And we certainly have to treat animals with respect and not to harm them.
On the contrary, when we recognize the preeminence of the human being, we also recognize the human being's responsibility towards
the whole creation.
All of creation. When God put Adam to control the world, he didn't mean to plunder the world and pillage and destroy the world. On the contrary, it meant he's responsible. He's a steward of the world. So Judaism is very much an environmentalist ideology and an animal rights ideology as well. But recognizing that the human being is superior because the human being has intelligence, has the ability to choose between good and evil. When you elevate the animal to the level of a human being, you risk reducing the human being to the level of the animal. And if you look at the way animals behave in the jungle, a lion will rip apart his prey. That's nature. Human beings can't be like that.
Well, we saw that in the last few days, that there are human beings that have no problem being like that.
Right.
But, it's... but on the other hand, having cruelty to animals is obviously something that we can't do. But understanding that animal rights not being the same as human rights, obviously the value of a human life is an absolute, whereas the value of an animal life obviously is a relative one. There is value to it, but there's a relative value. But if you have a look in the 30s, the initial human rights, animal rights movements was in Germany. The Nazis were actually one of their big things was animal rights. Animal rights, it was exactly what you're saying. They brought the animal rights up to the level of human rights to the point where they didn't see the difference, and therefore they thought they did what Cain did, and right. Unfortunately were able to bring themselves to a state where they could murder people in cold blood.
Considering the human being to be superior means he has greater godly awareness and therefore greater responsibility. The same idea as the chosen people. People bristle when they hear the words chosen people. It's the very opposite of the concept of the master race. It's the antithesis. Chosen people means that we have special privileges, gifts that God gave us, and it's our responsibility to be a light to the nations of the world, to be humble. Torah says, I love you not because you're the greatest, because you're the fewest. And one of the translations of that is you're the most humble. You recognize your role as being a servant of God, and being a servant of God means you're responsible for the whole world.
And we are held to a higher standard, not only by the world, but by God himself.
Absolutely. And if someone wants to convert to Judaism, that means they have to be prepared to take on the role of the Jewish people, the responsibilities. That's why we don't encourage conversion, because it's not fun to be Jewish.
It's very fun to be Jewish.
It's very fun to practice Judaism.
Obviously, it
but
gives
if
us
you look at
a great amount of joy and purpose.
Yes,
there's no question, and
that's true.
We're very thankful for that.
But to think that we're going to benefit only, we suffered immeasurably, disproportionately.
Because we're held to that higher standard.
We're held to a higher standard, but the Jewish people have this responsibility, and if someone is ready to take that responsibility, then sure, we'll embrace the converts. And many of the converts of Judaism turned out to be the greatest Jewish personalities. You have Rabbi Akiva, was a son of Kams, Rabbi Meir, Onkelos, Shmaya, Avtalion, Ruth, Jethro, and many others. But we don't see converts because not every person has to be Jewish. Judaism doesn't believe that if you're not Jewish, you won't be saved. If you follow your 7 Noahide commandments, then God has a place for you in paradise after you leave this world. And we respect every human being created in God's image. Jewish people were given special responsibilities, chosen for those special, like a special forces in a military.
To educate the whole world.
To educate the
To
world.
bring them to that consciousness of good over evil.
Right. So we solved all the problems.
All the world's problems just like that.
Right.
Well, it's we're definitely living through biblical times of biblical proportions. What's happening not just in Israel but throughout the world, both on the good side and on the challenges. And the Rebbe did say that we're meant to look at every event and everything that's happening in the world as being a sign of the furtherance of the prophecies of the coming of Mashiach. And anyone that looks at the prophecies, anyone that looks at the prophets, has to admit that 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, no one would have believed that we'd be at a time that we're in today, that the Jewish people in the position that we're in today could only have happened through divine assistance and direction. It was a couple of years ago, I actually went to visit Rome, and I was in Rome, and one of the most emotional times for me was to visit the Arch of Titus in Rome, where they built a memorial to the destruction of Jerusalem, and they have their 2,000-year-old monument, a picture of the Jewish slaves being removed with the holy vessels from Jerusalem and brought to Rome. And obviously going to see the Colosseum and seeing where so many Jews were slaughtered for entertainment of the Romans. The Romans were quite barbaric, as everyone knows. They were barbaric people. But that week that I went there was the same week that the embassy in Jerusalem, the U.S. embassy, was opened in Jerusalem. And I couldn't help but feel that here I am standing under this Arch of Titus, of the destruction of Jerusalem, of recognizing that Jerusalem now belongs to the nation, so to speak. And 2,000 years later, here we are in the Jewish people, back recognized by the world, and certainly by the superpower of the world at the time, that Jerusalem belongs to the Jewish people. So it's not just the Jews that acknowledge or need to acknowledge our destiny, but it's also something that through the world acknowledging that destiny, it elevates the whole world to a higher level and to a standard of living a godly life. And we're seeing these prophecies happen in front of our eyes, and we're certain that we're going to see the victory of the Jewish people in Israel and the victory of good over evil throughout the whole world. And it will usher in a time of peace of the whole world, this universal consciousness of good that will come about, that every person will have that direct relationship with God. And we should see it, and we should see it very soon.
Amen.
So, yeah. Well, it was a pleasure spending this time with you.
Pleasure is mine, as they say.
And we should only see each other on happy occasions and happier occasions.